Yes, I heard you screaming. Please subscribe to help you and your motorcycle perform better. I get this question a lot. In fact, more than a lot. Because everybody wants to know, because everybody can't read the owner's manual and can't get the information out of the service manual, which led to the title of this video. For fork's sake, let's answer all your questions in one video. Here we go. I know what's coming. First things first, all you oil engineers, everybody that knows about this topic in depth, I need you to pay it forward. Not to whine and complain, but what I'd like you to do in the comment section of this video is share your own experience as well as share your understanding, so that those of us that want to dive way deeper into this for a much greater understanding can benefit from your knowledge. So I'm going to ask you to pay it forward, not slam the video, and help somebody else, because this is probably only valuable to 0.002% of motorcycle riders that really study this, but that number's growing rapidly. So let's do the right thing here and help everybody else. For everybody like me, every bottle of fork oil comes with a number on it. What does that mean? Well, it's 5, 10, 15, 20 W. And W isn't weight, it's winter. I know, it's confusing, right? So it's easy to say weight because it's easy. So to get more technical, we've got to use the word winter after the number. That's a separate topic. What we're going to get into now is ways in which it's measured. Now, if you go online, instead of looking at the bottle that says, "This is awesome oil, you need to buy it, it's really good," on the website side, you'll see there's a rating. The most common rating you'll see is Centistokes or CST, and that is governed by heat. There's a test at 40 Celsius and there's a test at 100 Celsius. In that instance, what we're looking for a CST number is how the oil flows at that rate, at that temperature, and it will give us an assigned number for both temperatures. For those who are more educated, they know that that's been superseded now by kinematic viscosity. The numbers for Centistokes and the numbers for kinematic viscosity, from what I've read so far, appear to be the same. I will do more reading, but so far they are identical numbers. As Centistokes is the most common thing we see on the web, I'm going to stick with it. For those that want to read more about what is the difference between kinematic, which is gravity, Centistokes, which is heat, dive in after the video on those very specific topics, and that will give you a much better understanding about what's going on there in differences. Bottom line with oil is water flows quick, maple syrup not so quick. Oil will flow at different rates based on a couple things, and one is heat and the other is viscosity. In terms of that, we can see what flow is because that makes perfect sense, but shear is where it goes through angles and the stresses that it is put under. That we don't understand a lot of. All the contractors that build houses know exactly what shear load is because there's a code and you have to build to that code. But in oil, it's slightly different. How do they figure it all out? Well, they use a test tube. They put it in the test tube and they let it flow. And it takes X in that same test tube for all viscosities to pour from the beginning to the end. And usually with kinematic, you'll see a number associated with the time lapse that will give you the number, whatever that is. So for instance, you would think that a 2.5 W oil for forks will flow a heck of a lot faster than a 20 W fork oil. The problem is with the fork oil industry, there's no regulation. So somebody's 2.5 is somebody's 5 is somebody's 7. And unfortunately, we are very grateful to everyone that took the time to post all the fork oils and all their viscosity index and Centistoke indexes on fork oil viscosity charts via Google. All that research is there for you, all the brands are there for you, and all the numbers are there for you. So why do we need to know this? Well, let's take an example. I used to live in the Pacific Northwest. Generally, it's cold and it's wet, and we don't get a huge amount of days in the summer over 90 Celsius. So if I'm looking for a CST,
90 Fahrenheit.
Let's use an example. I used to live in the Pacific Northwest. Average temperatures there, relatively speaking, were fairly cold. So 25 to 30 Celsius, 70 to 90 Fahrenheit, maybe in the summer. Overall, on average, the temperature's lower. In that case, I'm going to look at center Stokes or viscosity index to find a small number, which means it flows quickly. In that case, that oil is going to be way better for me compared to me living in Las Vegas or Barstow or areas of that kind, which are regularly over 30 Celsius, 90 Fahrenheit for a lot of the year. So selecting the right oil for your suspension is going to be factored on, well, what's your average temperature? Now you've got to put into that equation as well, how do you use the bike? Do you go out and rip on it on the weekends? Because if you do, the suspension action and the velocity in the suspension is rapid. So that's going to get the oil hotter, and it's also going to shear load the oil repeatedly more than it would if you go for a leisurely ride on the weekends and don't go fast. Take that one step further. What if you go to the track? For example, at the Ridge in Washington State, where generally it's going to be pretty cool, versus Willow Springs, where it's baking hot and it's 42 in the shade, 110. How much more is the suspension being abused? How much more is the oil being heated up? So with the center Stokes number for temperature, the 40 and 100 makes a big deal because that's oil temperature. And in that case, depending on your type of use and the place you live, that really helps dive into a certain set of numbers that will make a lot of sense for you. Now, because all this research is done, it's great to know that people have contributed all those numbers, provided them to us, so we can take a look at what we need to do next. What's that? Well, let's look at some specific examples of fork oils and their numbers. Next level. Ta-da! So what we've done is certainly the most common brands that I'll use at the track and refer to in the videos are Motul and Maxima. Maxima is clearly written out, and the red numbers are the Motul numbers. So we were talking about in the introduction, oil is measured in a set test tube of how much it comes through, and that's the kinematic number. Now we're looking at the CST number, which is the temperature of the oil. So you can see on the 40 side, which is Celsius, the numbers are pretty big compared to the 100. What does that mean? Well, oil that's a lot hotter is a lot thinner, and it will basically go through that test tube volume a lot faster. So let's take a look at the numbers. For Maxima and Motul 5 weight, they're very close to each other. There's only 2 points in it. When we get up to the 10 weight, still close, gap's expanding a little bit. When we go to the 15, now we're getting bigger. So with the 15W with Maxima, it pours faster through that given test tube and drains out much faster than the Motul does. So at 40 Celsius, Maxima 15 weight moves quicker. So back to that Pacific Northwest, colder average climates, maybe the Maxima 15 is better than the Motul at 57.1 because it flows quicker. When we get to the 20 weight, well, obviously there's a huge gap, 65.6 to 77.9. That's a big difference. So where is this most useful? Something like a damping rod fork with basic suspension, where that oil has huge orifices to go through. Then maybe the Maxima 15 and 20 is actually, in terms of temperature, too thin and flowing too fast. And with a non-adjustable damping rod fork, that rebound's not going to settle out as much as it might with the Motul. Let's go across to actual riding temperature. when we're out there riding the bike? Well, the numbers differ dramatically, right? I mean, there's a huge drop-off, which you would expect. Hot oil is going to flow a lot faster than cooler oil. So at that point, the numbers are remarkably similar until we get to maxima 20. It actually goes faster when it's hotter. So knowing that data point, if you're in a hot climate, the maxima 20 would be the better oil, because it takes longer to go through that given test tube. Interesting data point. We added one more column that you'll often see on fork oil viscosity charts. VI, viscosity index. So what does that mean? Well, as we put on the board, it's the amount at which the viscosity drops as the oil heats up. And the higher the viscosity index number, basically you drop less or it's far more stable. So the bigger the number, the more consistent the oil performance is. So if we look across the board here, the bigger the number, the more consistent it is. Well, maxima 5 weight is a bigger number than mode 2. So that would mean for, let's say, a track application, maybe that's your preferential oil because it's a bigger number over the 112. 5 weight's generally the go-to oil in forks for track and race applications that match valving. Greater durability? Sure, absolutely, because it offers more stability. The only question there that we don't have the information on is what happens to these numbers after 8 race weekends, after 12 track days, after 1 season. We don't have historical data there, which would be really useful to those of us that ride the track and race to understand that the oil we're picking gives us the most durability and the most stability. That'd be nice. All those engineers out there that have that data, come on now, get it shared. Let's hear it. Then as we go through the weights, it would appear that Maxima has the bigger number all the way through, the biggest drop-off being on the 20 weight. So in just that little bit of research, you can take a look at your bike, let's say MT-07. Damping rod fork, need to figure out what oil to use. We generally go to 15 or 20 weight in that bike, generally. So in looking at those numbers, Maxima 20 is quite a bit more than 15. It has much higher stability. So that might be your go-to oil if you go and have a lot of fun on the weekends and ride the bike relatively hard. If you commute on it, maybe the 15 weight is the better choice. It still has a pretty high number at 154 between it and the 10. There's not much difference, but certainly between the 15 and the 20, excuse me, there's a bigger jump. If you take a minute to think about it, then your purchase for fork oil is going to make a lot more sense, and you're buying the right oil for the right application. And in a lot of videos, I am looking to see, can I buy oil first to use what I have to make it work better? And if I can't get it to that point with oil, what's the next step in financial expenditure, which is a revalve of the stock equipment if it's a cartridge and if you can get into it to keep the OEM pistons and redo the shims, or level 2, is it replacement components, which includes piston and valving that are engineered on a dyno and provided to you by a given company like K-Tech and Olins and Nitron, etc., etc. And then the third is based on your level of use. If you're going to the track and then you're going to upgrade to a race bike, normally we take the stock internals away and we replace the internals completely with a cartridge kit. And all of the manufacturers provide that, where you take the stock stuff out, put their stuff in, and now we're at a race level. But again, when you get to track or race, the engineering you've purchased requires a set oil viscosity. Yes, I heard you screaming. But which one applies to you, your environment that you ride in, the pace that you have, which one's most appropriate? It will be really nice to have that historical data to find the degradation rate, especially on VI, over X number of days. So if that is out there, if somebody can share the link for that we can all benefit from, thank you. That'd be great, because then we can make an even more informed decision on what we want for the bikes we own. So hopefully that's given you an insight into CST, kinematic velocity, viscosity index, and what oil would make the most sense for you to buy for you, for your bike, your environment, and your use.